It's the middle of the week in Australia and you are starting to run low on fuel. Each day you check the prices as you drive past the servo, hoping to pick up a day where it's slightly cheaper. But over the years it's just becoming more and more unaffordable. What if the reason for the unaffordability is because almost half the costs are from multiple government taxes applied, and the government is making a lot of money out of you? Australia is a country that relies heavily on car use. Whether it's trips to the beach, trips to Macca's, trips to the servo, or just a trip out of town, motor vehicles are the most commonly used transportation. With a population of 20.8 million Australians aged at least the legal driving age of 16, there is 20.1 million registered motor vehicles. That's almost one vehicle per person, with 92.5% of households saying they have at least one car as well. With the average fuel expenditure per week now exceeding $100, this is a taxable goldmine that the governments can't ignore. At over 15 billion collected in fuel excise tax per year, this is over 3% of the entire Australian government's revenue. But how did we get here? Let's have a look at a brief history of tax on fuel in the land down under. In 1926, General Motors formed in Australia, which would go on to become the country's leading car manufacturer. With the booming interest in motor vehicles, the government needed to raise more revenue for creation and expansion of roads to the explosion of the want for cars from the Australian people. To try solve for part of this problem, the government introduced a tax on petrol. Revenue from petrol excise was hypothecated for Commonwealth roads grants to the states, meaning the money taxed from fuel would be allocated to the roads via these grants. The money would not be spent elsewhere because the nation needed to fund the roads. In 1926, General Motors Australia formed. We need money for roads, let's create an excise tax on fuel and dedicate that money through Commonwealth grants for road creation. Yeah, it's not fair petrol has an excise when diesel doesn't. Yeah, you're right, that's not bloody fair at all. So they introduced excise to diesel. Yeah, it's not what we wanted. What we wanted was you to take it away so there was none like diesel. Yeah, well, not much we can do about that now. And this led to Australians being, well, Australians. If this money is for the roads and I don't drive on the road with my diesel 4x4, I shouldn't have to pay tax on the fuel. Righto then, you can apply for an excise exemption for off-road use. My boat's not a road vehicle, so why do I need to pay excise on fuel for my boat to build roads? Let's just keep it simple. All cars and boats pay it, except for diesel cars with an exemption. The boats aren't on the road. Yeah, no, that's about enough out of you, Larry. Enough of this boat nonsense. Fuel excise tax is no longer for roads and it will go into a general revenue pool for us to spend. Are our excise exemptions for not driving on roads still valid even though the hypothecated period has ceased? Well, I suppose so. I don't see any harm in a few farmers not paying excise on their tractors. Yep, nah, excise exemption's gone. You bloody lot have ruined it for yourselves with everyone with a four-wheel drive claiming to have never drove on the road for the last 23 years. Excise exemptions abolished. Oh, that's not fair. As punishment, I'm imposing a surcharge on fuel excise to provide grants to our states for road constructions with the Bicentennial Trust Road Development Trust Fund. Oh, that's not fair. Great Point mining industry. Well, your lobbyists have just came up with a great idea that we support, and that's for a diesel rebate, which we will enact immediately. Yeah, we know it says it's for the roads, but we're just going to use it for other stuff. Yeah, look, unfortunately, the mining industry has abused the rebates, but we will still give it to them and at an increased rate per their request, but with some rules this time that we will trust them to follow themselves without any government monitoring per their request. Let's add GST on top of the fuel excise. Oh, that's not fair! Let's just make sure we are moving our excise taxes up appropriately with a bi-annual review, just to make sure the government's not copying a raw deal and falling too far behind inflation, because we do need to collect our revenue. We have an election coming up, so we will temporarily halve the fuel excise tax because the Liberal Party needs votes. Worst case is that we lose and it makes Labor look really bad if they have to remove it, or if we win, that's fine, we remove it because we won anyway. Well, Scott made that rule up, not me. Excise needs to come back in full. And here we are today. with fuel near its highs, with the cost of living spiraling out of control. But how much would fuel cost if the tax was removed? Let's use a hypothetical fuel cost of $2 per litre at the Bowser to meet the middle ground between unleaded and diesel. GST is our overarching tax and applies on top of the fuel excise tax. This works out to 18.18 cents. From what's remaining, we need to remove the fuel excise tax of 44.2 cents. This puts the cost of fuel with government tax removed to $1.37 at the Bowser, covering the petrol station and oil company's costs and profit to get it into your vehicle. The third level of tax applied is one most people overlook. To pay for the fuel at the Bowser, you have already been taxed on your income before being taxed further on what you spend your money on. If we use the average Australian's tax bracket of 34.5% and apply it to purchasing a litre of fuel, this shows that to purchase 1 litre of fuel, the average Australian needs to earn $3.05 to cover it. When we combine income tax collected by the government for the purchase, GST and the excise tax, of this example, we can see the government is collecting $1.68 in tax revenue per litre sold, totaling a whopping 55% of the true cost per litre being taxed. Thank you very much for your tax contributions. You're welcome, Australia. While there are some business types that allow deductions of fuel from income tax or rebates, this leaves the vast majority paying through the roof to keep a vehicle running. After we consider the government tax on buying or selling a car, registration also being a tax, and all GST paid on insurance and maintenance, the tax on freedom to drive is creating a burden on the average person. When the initial intent of the excise tax was to be dedicated to our roads, and this was removed over 60 years ago, why should it still exist when it is now diverted to however the government sees fit to spend? Is it fair Australians are paying more tax on fuel so the government can spend $100 billion on nuclear submarines? Or should the tax be abolished? Leave your thoughts down below in the comments. If you learned something today or liked the content, make sure you smash the like and subscribe button. Also, if you have a mate that you think needs to see this, make sure you share it with them or any groups that they're in.
This is my turn.